Friends and colleagues, welcome back. There's a lot to talk about here. Forgive me, been away for a little bit, but now I'm back here to bring you the latest Colombia business news recap. Let's first start off with there's a big, fight going on between President Gustavo Petro and the Supreme Court. So the prosecutor, Francisco Barbosa, who was appointed by his good friend Ivan Duque, the former president, came to an end. And in Colombia, unlike a lot of other places, so the attorney general is not directly appointed by the president. So, for example, in the United States, John Kennedy, when he was president, appointed his brother Bobby Kennedy as the attorney general. And in any case, the attorney general in that system serves at the pleasure of the president. What happens in Colombia is a little bit more convoluted. When they rewrote the Constitution, I believe the last time was in 1991. But basically, the president can give a short list of names, nominees, to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court justices will vote on who they like among those names submitted by the president. So the president can submit some names of people he likes or wants as the attorney general, and then the Supreme Court will choose. They'll make the final decision as a vote among them. They need a supermajority, not a simple majority is not going to do. And the individual Supreme Court justices can also decide to vote in blank, and that's to say that an individual justice can say, I don't like any of these candidates, so I'm not going to give any of these candidates my vote. And so the process has to go through several rounds, and basically the president then is going to have to submit a candidate for attorney general or a nominee for attorney general that's going to meet the approval of the vast majority of Supreme Court justices. I believe that the system was set up this way to kind of put checks and balances in place so that a president cannot have a narrow majority, for example, a narrow majority of Supreme Court justices from his either political party or movement or alignment, and then kind of ram through the kind of attorney general that he would want. As you could imagine, a president like Gustavo Petro was going to pick an attorney general that's going to be in line with his concept of total peace and his concept of negotiating and kind of improvising with these armed groups, these mafia groups like Clan del Golfo or ELN guerrillas and such. Other people might want somebody that's more of a strict constitutionalist. But anyway, that's the big fight right now. And so the president has been getting more and more frustrated because the Supreme Court is not, approving of any of his choices. A angry mob that of Petro supporters. You can question whether Petro sent them or not, but they were Petro supporters. I believe, I'm not sure on this, but I believe they might have been also allied with FECODE, which is the National Teachers Union, that is very much aligned with Petro. There was an angry mob that went and kind of attacked the Supreme Court facility. The riot police had to come out, and the Supreme Court justices were trapped in there for about 5 hours. And so that's been a big scandal. Petro tried to downplay it, but the Supreme Court, of course, as a separate and co-equal branch of government, as they say in the civics classes and textbooks, are very upset with this and are denouncing the pressure that it's like Petro, according to them, or the people who disagree with Petro, is trying to bully them into selecting one of his choices. And they're pushing back, saying that they're not going to do this. So that frustration and pressure, Petro is really getting frustrated because he came in, he had all these big ideas of what he was going to do, his total peace and things like that. But on the side of people who are opponents to Petro, a lot of people were terrified that, okay, he's going to turn the country into Venezuela and stack the Supreme Court. Well, here we go, right here. It turns out he can't move so quickly. But it turns out Colombia has enough institutionalism to frustrate maybe his more ambitious plans. He hasn't passed his health reform yet that would completely rework how healthcare is administered in the country. He hasn't been able to implement or to pass his labor reform yet. And so while there's still an unhealthy amount of uncertainty for investors and for business, it's not a worst case scenario in terms of there is enough institutionalism in place, as we can see in this particular instance, to where he can't just go and kind of implement whatever he wants to do. He gets frustrated. He hasn't worked to build coalitions and to say, okay, let me work with the opposition and to get get compromise. He's rather, on the other hand, he said, okay, I'm going to call my supporters out to the streets to march and to protest and make a lot of noise and such. And so he's becoming more and more frustrated. Another place we can see this is, for example, with his foreign minister, Alvaro Leiva. Alvaro Leiva ran the chancellery, the Ministry of Foreign Relations. He came in there. There was a contract in place, a huge contract for the printing of the passport, the Colombian passports. And this, there's a firm, I forget what they're called. They have like I think I'm pretty sure there's an international firm. And Leiva comes in and just decides he's going to cancel the contract because he wants to give it to, yes, presumably he wants to give it to somebody else. I think there was another excuse, but it was a big, giant, juicy contract. The firm that won the bid, I think, is the firm that already kind of had it in the previous contract term. So the company sued the government for breach of contract, saying you can't just go do that. It has international and treaty implications. Thomas Gregg and Sons is the company. So now there's a 250 billion peso lawsuit, 117 billion pesos. I'm sorry. And if the government loses for breach of contract, you can't just say, well, I'm going to cancel a contract because I want to. I think the penalty, they'll have to pay, the damages will be 250 billion pesos. The contract itself was for 117 million pesos. And so that's with Thomas Gregg and Sons. And again, the good thing, there's a lot of challenges and problems doing business in Colombia. I could tell you some stories myself. But one of the good things is that compared to other developing economies, there is a relatively high degree of institutionalism. You can't just go and improvise and I mean, you can do this anywhere to some extent, but it's not like some banana republic somewhere where some strong man can just come in and say, here, give a contract to you, and then take a contract from them, and because I like them or because I don't like them or because they made me mad. It's not that kind of place, fortunately. So anyway, Leiva is, so in Colombia you have the Attorney General we just talked about, who kind of, the fiscal, who kind of acts like a Attorney General does in other countries, a prosecutor's office. They go after crimes and things like that. In the U.S. it would be, they would have the Justice Department. But you also have a separate structure, prosecution and investigative body called the Procuraduría, and they are like a special Attorney General's office or prosecutor's office that focuses on the public sector. So if you are a public employee or functionary or politician and you're going to be investigated, it's not going to be by the Attorney General, it's going to be by the Procuraduría. Okay, so the Procuraduría, and they have a lot of power, and they're fairly independent. So the Procuraduría removed Alvaro Leiva from office because even the government, at least the independent kind of government prosecutor's office that focuses on public figures, says that Leyva has acted improperly and removed him against Petro's wishes. So again, that's a good sign for institutionalism. And I'm not making a judgment on if Leyva was correct or not. I really honestly haven't looked very closely into the matter. But the fact that you have these checks and balances in Colombia is conceptually a good thing. So anyway, Leyva's been removed, so he's no longer the foreign minister. That could change, for example, if he won his case, because now you're going to have a case that goes before what he's done and looked at what he's done, and so you have the lawsuit with Thomas Gregg and Sons, the big passport printing company, and the government. But then now you also have the prosecution of Leyva for kind of malfeasance or for not acting correctly in his office. And Leyva could win that and be put back into office, or Petro could eventually pick somebody else. So right now they have bought Luis Gilberto Morillo back from Washington. He was the Colombian ambassador to Washington. They brought him back in down to Bogota to be the acting foreign minister while Leyva's case runs out. Now, Murillo himself, Luis Gilberto Murillo, is a fascinating guy. He's from Chocó. He used to be the governor of Chocó, which is the impoverished Pacific department of Colombia that takes up most of the North Pacific coast. So he's from there. He's from Chocó. He went and studied, I think, mining in Moscow, where he met his wife. So his wife is Russian. And he came back. He served as governor. And I think he was in Congress for a little bit too. He got death threats, or his life was in danger. So he fled to the United States, where he started out kind of I think he was a bouncer at a nightclub or something like that for a minute. But eventually, smart guy, eventually got into government types of things and think tanks and institutions and that kind of thing. And eventually became a U.S. citizen. So when he came back, when he was appointed ambassador, he actually ran for president. So he ran for president. He actually ran against Petro. He didn't get a lot of support or votes. He was not one of the major party candidates. So he didn't do well nationally. And like what happens here in Colombia a lot, there's a lot of coalition forming in elections and things like that. And so Petro said, look, come and throw your support behind me, and it'll be good for your career. And so he actually had to renounce his U.S. citizenship to serve as the Colombian ambassador to the United States, which kind of makes sense. But anyway, so he's been called back. Seems like a very capable guy. Certainly an interesting guy. I've never met him or anything like that or talked to him, but very impressed with him. But anyway, he's back. He's now the head of the Colombian Foreign Ministry while Leyva is out. Will he become the permanent foreign minister? Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, so he's been having an interesting time of things himself. Now, going back to I mentioned the Procuraduría. Forgive me for not taking the time to pronounce it correctly, but locally in Medellin, so what happens in Colombia is that you're in a campaign, like say you're running for president, okay? And you'll have several candidates. Whoever comes in second place gets to be a senator. So the first loser wins the Senate position. Same thing happens at the city level. So you run for mayor. Whoever's the runner-up, whoever comes in second place gets to be on city council. So Daniel Quintero, who was the mayor of Medellin in the last term of 4 years, his candidate, you can't run again for re-election. So his candidate, who is his cousin-in-law, his wife's cousin, Daniela Osorio, I think is his Diana Osorio is his wife's name, but her cousin Juan Carlos Upegui um, ran for mayor as Quintero's designated candidate. Um, he did so poorly. Quintero actually resigned from the mayor's office early, ostensibly to help support Upegui and to help campaign for him to make sure that he won. But he was having quite a time of things. He was under the gun for different investigations and things like that. Anyway, Upegui ends up getting like less than 11% of the votes. He got beat. A record setting, the current mayor, who was a mayor before and came back, Fico, Gutierrez, um, ended up winning with a record setting 70 something percent of the vote, meaning that people were extremely dissatisfied with Quintero, or Quinterismo as they call his, you would informally call his movement, and his cousin-in-law Juan Carlos Upegui, who did horribly. He got less than 11. He got like 10 point something percent of the vote. But anyway, that's enough to come in second place, and so he got his city council seat, and he said, "I'm going to continue the opposition to Federico Gutierrez Fico, as they call him, who won with a resounding mandate from the Paisas, from the people in Medellin." But so in Colombia, they have a lot of, it can get kind of complicated. They have a lot of laws that are sort of anti-nepotism, and like I mentioned, how it can be kind of convoluted, how the Supreme Court or how the Attorney General is elected. So there's all these different kinds of laws in Colombia, and one of them is that you can't appoint a family member, okay, if you're a politician, even to some far off post. So just like how John Kennedy, like I mentioned, appointed his brother Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General, that kind of thing is a lot harder to do down here, because they don't want you obviously filling the government with your cousins and people like that and run some kind of dynasty. So it turns out that that Upegui's father, who's an educator of some sort, he's some kind of teacher or principal, school director, was appointed to a city position during the period where that kind of thing would be illegal and improper, with Upegui being a public figure. And so based on that, the Procuraduría, again, has removed him from city council. Now, of course, he's complaining and saying, and Quintero's out there on Twitter saying, "Oh, they're just out to get us, and it's a conspiracy, and it's the Alvaro Uribe's boogeyman's fault." But if the guy, if his dad was appointed, he was either appointed or he wasn't. Okay, so it's either illegal or it's not, and the Procuraduría has the power to remove people from office if it turns out that they're violating one of these public sector, public service laws. So now Upegui's out. He and Quintero and their camp are crying quite loudly, and they're on Twitter, making, or X or whatever it's called, making a lot of noise. So that's not going well for that camp. On the other hand, Fico has problems of his own. A terribly embarrassing episode. The one of his supporters, one of his parceros, like they say down here, his homies, was appointed secretary culture. So the city, the federal, the national government as well, they'll have the secretary of culture, and you go and talk about open museums and stuff like that. Well, the guy gets up there, and he was in some kind of, he wasn't talking to the press, but he was in a meeting. It wasn't a private meeting. But it wasn't really, it wasn't a private meeting, but it wasn't something that's supposed to be in the press or whatever. And he says, "Hey, I got appointed." I don't know if he was serious or clowning around or whatever, but he said, "I was appointed to the culture, to be secretary of culture, and I don't know anything about culture, and I don't know anything about a library." So he said this comment. I don't know if he was joking or if he was serious, whatever the case might be. It got out in the press. making Fico look very bad, making Fico look like he's appointing them, he's appointing incompetent people, and the incompetence is being admitted by the people themselves that are getting appointed. So of course that was a terrible embarrassment for Fico's administration in Medellin, and Fico had to ask for the guy's resignation. What I'm hearing on the street is that the guy was not Fico's first choice anyway. He's had difficulty finding somebody competent for that position. He went to people who were in his previous administration from back before Quintero. But it's not that they don't like Federico Gutierrez or anything like that, but they are now in jobs that they like very much and don't want to quit whatever kinds of projects they're working on now. So again, the bad news, at least in Medellin, isn't just for Upegui and Quintero, but also Fico's had to deal with some embarrassment. Petro looks like he's losing the battle of the Bogota Metro. He wants to put the metro underground. Bogota has been trying to build a metro since back in the 1970s. There is a headline article in El Tiempo, which is the leading daily newspaper in Colombia based in Bogota, from 1977, where it says Bogota is finally going to get its metro. I was a kid back then, but they still don't have a metro. And Claudia Lopez, and I'll give her a lot of credit. I didn't know what to make of her when she was elected. She is, it says a lot in a culturally, socially conservative country like Colombia, that she was elected as an openly lesbian person in Bogota, and she finished her term. I think she did a pretty good job. I didn't know what to expect. She is kind of a little bit left of center, not kind of a radical like Petro, but as far as administering the city, she was relatively without scandal. Generally was a good administrator. And what surprised a lot of people is that both of them being kind of left of center, she went to battle with Petro, and she really called Petro out on a lot of things and called him out for a lot of what she saw was BS. Petro kind of tried to, after the metro, which is a city project, the engineers or whatever the case might be was determined that it's going to be mostly an elevated train system like what Medellin has. After all the licitations and all the contracting and everything is done, Petro, once he becomes president, decides he wants to change everything, again improvising, and have it made subterranean, which would require kind of going back and erasing everything that's been done and starting from scratch. He says it would be a whole different project, right? And Claudia Lopez has been like, shut up and go away, and we're running this metro. Stop meddling in it. It's not a national government project. It's a city project. And Petro has threatened to withhold the portion of funding that's supposed to come from the national government. He's really tried to bully things to get his way. Claudia beat him, and the metro is going to be as it was. Now, Bogota's new mayor is a center-right guy, kind of more in the mode of Peñalosa, who was the mayor before Claudia Lopez. And he's continuing the project kind of as Claudia did as well, again telling Petro to go away. And it looks like Petro's acquiesced because they've allocated or made official the part of the budget that's supposed to come from the national government. So it looks like then he's lost that battle and is not going to be able to hold the metro up. Now, what is holding the metro up is there's a big Chinese contracting consortium that's building it, and they're slow. They're behind. Claudia Lopez came out against them, threatening them, and it looks like they're not meeting the timeline that they committed to under the contract. And we've seen so Petro went over to China, and it looks like he was trying to even maybe talk to Chinese, going around the city administration and saying, hey, let's make this a subterranean thing. And Xi Jinping would not meet with them. This is an interesting thing because Petro goes all the way over the head of state, all the way over there to China, and could not meet with Xi Jinping, who would not interfere with the consortium, the Chinese consortium that's building the metro project. So the head of the metro project, who's or no, not the head of the metro project, was it him or the Chinese embassy, tweeted something out saying, look, how come it's so hard to build a metro in Bogota, whereas in China we get these things done right away, instantly, with no problems. And then a lot of people on Twitter responded, well, wait a minute, in China you can kick people out of their houses and they have no say in the matter. And if you want to decide we're going to build the metro from here to over there and you live in that path, well, too bad for you. Whereas in Colombia, this is what the Twitter people were kind of going after the Chinese official about, was, well, we have human rights in Colombia. Obviously not perfect. There are problems and things like that. But you do have rights. The government can't just come and, show up and throw you out. In fact, there's a case going on right now in Medellín where Pablo Escobar's old house from 30 years ago, what was it, 1990s, he had a mansion on, if you know Medellín and you come down Las Palmas from the airport, you're coming down in the city. You follow Las Palmas all the way to where it ends near downtown. It ends on 33rd Avenue, right there by the San Diego shopping mall. Well, to your right, there's a big hill, okay, La Asomedera. And up on that hill, Escobar had a mansion. And his brother has been trying to run a museum, but the government keeps trying to take the mansion, saying, because what they'll do down here is what, like in the U.S., you have civil forfeiture, and they'll take the property, they'll take any property that you buy with ill-gotten gains. That's why the amusement park Hacienda Nápoles, which used to be Escobar's ranch out in Doradal, Colombia, about 4 hours outside of Medellin, lovely place. Go see Hacienda Nápoles. They took it. The government took it, got a contractor to run it, and now it's a water park, and like something you'd see in Orlando. Really nice. They've got a big wave pool, and then he had all these wild animals. You guys already know about the hippos, but he had all these tigers and stuff like that. And they took his old ranch and they made it into a zoo. And not a zoo where you go and see the animals in the cages, but the kind of modern progressive zoos where the cats have this huge area and it's pinned in so they can't get to you, but they have acres of land or hectares of land that they can run around in, and kind of a semi-natural habitat kind of thing. He had was it a bullfighting ring or chicken? Yeah, it was a bullfighting ring. They turned that into, of all things, a museum about Africa. I don't know why, but it's actually nice, but I mean, I don't know what the connection is there. But so that was a case of extinción del dominio, domain extinction. It's where that phrase roughly translates as. And so they've been trying to take this house, but his brother's been living in the house, and now his brother. So there's all these rules and things, like for institutionalism, you can't just come and take land. That's where I was going with this. And now the brother, so the prosecutors or whoever finally have all the papers in order to foreclose on the property and evict this guy. And now he went to the doctor and got a doctor's order that says he's sick. So you can't, unless you have, and I'm no lawyer, but the way I understand it is in Colombia, unless you have a mortgage against the property, like you owe the bank and the bank's foreclosing on you. Other than that, if you have a judgment against somebody, like in a lawsuit or something like that, you can't make somebody homeless. Okay, so even though the federal government or the national government's trying to take this old mansion up on La Somedera, up on that hill, they can't, because the guy's living in it. And now he's saying he's sick, and you can't make him put out on the street. And I don't, So, but that's an interesting case. And so the point is that you can't, where they're building this metro now, the government, the city of Bogota, is responsible for where they're going to put it, and for compensating vendors, for compensating, you might have a store, and when they do construction, they're going to close your street off. And so you have rights that have to be protected. And the point of all of this was, when they were this Twitter exchange, was the Chinese official was frustrated and trying to blame the Colombian bureaucracy for their troubles with this metro. And so a lot of just Colombians, regular Colombians, went after him saying, well, that's because over in China, people don't have human rights. And so that ended up being kind of blowing up into a big deal. So speaking of Petro, and we touched on criminality, looking at Pablo Escobar's old mansion, one of several up there on La Asomadera, which is a hill there, kind of between Poblado and the area that starts to get towards downtown in Medellín. But anyway, crime is increasing. It's always a serious problem down here in Latin America. The irony, Latin America traditionally, at least in the last 100 years or so, there's been is a very peaceful part of the world when it comes to wars between countries. You don't see Latin American countries tending to go to war with one another, but the same countries struggle to varying degrees with crime. So one place is less violent than the rest of the world. On the other hand, it's more violent than the rest of the world, whether you're looking at sovereign crime or wars or conflicts or things like that. And then you compare that to either street crime or insurgencies. Like you've had insurgencies in Colombia. In Peru, you had Maoist insurgencies, Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path. Now you're having not really insurgencies, but more organized crime problems in Ecuador. Costa Rica has been seeing that. And so Petro, who of course is a former guerrilla himself, having belonged to the M19 insurgency, and that's a former guerrilla group that has a lot of blood on its hands. Not as much as the FARC or the ELN. They were more of an urban kind of group with their own brand of communism / nationalism type of thing going on. But so Petro ran, and this was part of his campaign, and he ran on this total peace initiative, and he thinks that he can get these armed groups to lay down their weapons just by giving them a good talking to, or maybe giving them something in return. Vastly different people go, well, okay, well, Juan Manuel Santos negotiated peace, so why not? Well, Juan Manuel Santos was the defense minister under Alvaro Uribe, and what he did was kind of break the FARC's back, and he was the main guy dropping bombs on the FARC and such, that when he became president, the FARC was kind of falling apart and had been weakened and was on the run. And so he negotiated from a position of strength. It's basically saying, you're going to sign a peace agreement or we'll just kill you until there's no more of you. Okay, and he was doing that. He was very aggressive and had success against them. So the government was negotiating from a position of strength. Then Duque came in and did not want to implement the peace process because he was beholden to Alvaro Uribe, who was against it. And so they made a mockery of him. So he pretty much failed because he could neither negotiate with them. He did not implement the peace agreement. So he failed doing that, and he failed to make any progress, and crime started to go up. During Petro's term, it's continued to go up. These insurgencies have gotten stronger, and Petro stopped the applying herbicide on the coca crops and things like that. So Colombian coca producers have made so much cocaine that the price has collapsed. And so now the farmers who grow it, it's like more profitable to grow potatoes than it is to grow cocaine. And so it's creating all kinds of unforeseen disruptions in the supply chain, which is really interesting. But anyway, Petro has been failing because he hasn't been able to negotiate with these rebel groups. I mean, he can negotiate with them, but they're kidnapping people. They kidnapped the father of a famous soccer guy, a soccer player who's a Colombian who's playing over there in the European leagues. And that caused a lot of public outcry, and it also embarrassed the government because here you are talking about total peace, and they're returning to kidnapping, which had almost died out. You really didn't have to worry about kidnapping in Colombia 5 years ago, but now it's starting to come back. And so, I've got these numbers from Colombia Risk Analysis, a great group of consultants, so I recommend you take a look at Colombia Risk Analysis, which is just Colombia Risk Analysis. It's not common belief. But this is where I got these numbers. And right now we see that insecurity, 87% of Colombians are saying that insecurity is worsening right now. 49% are in disagreement with the government's continuation of negotiations with the ELN. 67% say that the total peace process is on the wrong track. And then 56% still see dialogue as a solution. But even those people that see dialogue as a solution to solve the problems with the armed group, most of them believe that or many of them believe that the current government, based on these numbers, is failing to do so. So he's not negotiating from a position of strength, but it's basically, we're going to just lay down our arms, the Petro administration, the military, and the police under the Petro administration, and hope you guys are going to do the same thing. Well, of course, they're not. The thing is, these criminals are not fighting to create some kind of communist utopia like the FARC used to talk about in the ELN. They may have believed that in the 1960s, but they're basically armed mafias. And they kidnap people and they extort people, and they either traffic in narcotics or facilitate narcotics trafficking. And what that means is that a lot of times the groups will say, well, we don't sell drugs ourselves. But what they do is they are these armed insurgents, and they're way out there in the mountains somewhere, and they will control this land or this territory. And so then the people that actually are the supply chain for the drugs, they then tax, or the actual narcotics people pay them, share some of that money with them to ensure safe passage. And so sometimes they're involved directly, and yes, they're trafficking in drugs. They're also extorting people. And then some other ones, these are kind of decentralized groups. And some of them will say, well, we're not going to, this particular group over here isn't involved in drugs, but they're just extorting people and kidnapping people and things like that. They charge you what's called a vacuna down here. Vacuna means vaccine. And it's the old racket, just like the mafia would do in New York or over in Italy. And they'll come and look at your store and say, okay, you got your furniture store. And they'll say, all right, you have to pay me so many dollars a month or so many pesos a month, and nothing will happen to you. If you don't pay, they'll kill you or blow up your store or something like that. That is still very, very common down here in Colombia. It doesn't happen everywhere. It happens more in small towns and rural areas. But even in places like Bogota or Medellin, it does happen. You're not going to see it in the fancy tourist areas, but it'll happen in the poorer neighborhoods. So in Medellin, you'll see that kind of thing on the north side of the city, up by Santo Domingo or Tricentenario or Robledo, Caribe, up in those areas, Comuna 1, Comuna 2. In Bogota, obviously, you'll see it quite a bit in the south of the city, in areas like Bosa, Usme, Kennedy, Puente Aranda. And then, of course, you're also going to see it in Cali and Cartagena and places like that as well. It's a big problem down here. So these groups, Petro thinks he can go talk to them. Well, the problem is you're not going to get them to lay down their arms unless they want to. It's not like they're out there, oh, poor us, we wish we didn't have to fight. If you would just give us social justice, then we'll be good and go get a job. No, they're criminals because they want to be criminals. Now, they go and kidnap kids and make the kids, they force them to fight, and they do all these horrible things. But the leadership, it's like if you're in the mafia, you're in the mafia because you want to be a gangster. You can't go to the mafia and say, look, guys, we'll give you a social program if you just stop being mobsters. They're mobsters because they want to be mobsters. Okay. And that, I think, is the fundamental problem with Petro's total peace. So anyway, aside from that kind of organized crime or violent insurgencies, in Medellin, there is another, well, not just Medellin, it's happening in Cartagena as well. There, as well as insecurity seeming to be on the rise broadly, there have been a rash of violent deaths with foreigners in Colombia, so much so that the State Department, the U.S. Embassy, put out a travel advisory warning people. Now, there are some of these things that seem to be people who have drug overdoses or something like that. You had a guy from, where was he from in Europe? Was it Romania? Or one of the former Soviet Warsaw Pact countries, and he jumped off of I think it was Romania. He jumped off of off the balcony of a hotel. He seemed to be having some kind of mental episode or something like that. Then you had some people that are just found dead in the jacuzzi or found dead in their hotel rooms. And then you also have some cases. So is that a crime or not? Or was there foul play involved or not? Not sure. Could be. But then you also have some interesting cases where it looks like there are criminals who are using Tinder and other dating apps, but especially Tinder, to capture foreigners, to get foreigners, and then they'll rob them or extort them or kidnap them or drug them with the scopolamine, which is a kind of a hallucinogenic that makes you lose your senses, and they rob you or whatever the case might be. There's a famous case. There was is he Vietnamese or Laotian? There was he's American, but he had Southeast Asian ancestry, and he came down here as a tourist. He left Colombia, he started coming down here. They killed him, and it was kind of like the girl he was supposedly dating was the one. They kidnapped him, and then he was found dead. We wrote about it. You can read about it in Finance Colombia. A Canadian was just found dead, hit on his head last week. There were last year over 50 cases of foreigners just in Medellin. I'm not even talking about the whole country. And I'm not talking about all foreigners. So I'm not including, for example, somebody maybe a Venezuelan refugee. Obviously, they're important, but what I'm pointing to is specifically people that are coming from places like from other parts of the world. Let me say it that way. So not a South American neighboring country. And what I mean, you look at the U.S., for example, if a Mexican person dies in the U.S., it's bad, but it's not the same kind of news as if somebody from, I don't know, Liechtenstein died. Not because the Mexican death is not as important, but because there's 60 million Mexicans, there's more than 40 million Mexicans. There's 60 million Latinos in the United States, more than relative, approximately. And the majority of them are Mexican. So it's just that there's more there. So you've got millions of, I think like 2 million Venezuelans roughly in Colombia. And so you're going to have, and because of the economic circumstances of them being here, sadly, they're going to be more exposed to different kind of criminal situations. But specifically, you have these travelers, people who are coming down here. Some of them seem to be kind of just innocent in the wrong place, wrong time, or maybe they've had medical problems or something like that. But then there does seem to be some foul play, and at least some of it, and we don't want to paint victims all with the same brush, but at least a significant portion of these victims were engaged in apparently some kind of sex tourism or something like that. So it goes without saying, probably not a good idea, but that is actually on the rise right now. And so it's gotten the foreign governments that partner with Colombia, the U.S. State Department and other foreign ministries are now taking notice of this and have issued cautions and things like that. We've published some of the cautions that have come out, for example, of the State Department, and that information is available to you. So be very careful if you're down here, let's say, living that life. Now, the Pan Am Games. So the Pan Am Games, you have the Olympics and you have all these different regional games that are in the non-Olympic years that people compete with. So the Olympics are this year. They're going to be in France, right? The Summer Olympics. But now in 2025, 2026, there's going to be regional games. And they always do that. It's kind of like the World Cup doesn't happen every year. And so you also have the other championships in the intervening years. Colombia had won the right to host the Pan Am Games. They had to pay a bunch of money to the organization, which is based in Chile, that handles the South American region of these games. And the contract was won. The effort started before with the previous administration, but okay, It's a big deal for Colombia because now everybody's going to fly into Colombia, and Colombia gets to show off how wonderful things are. They were going to be held in Barranquilla. So the government had to pay, so you have to pay the organizing committee. And they were supposed to pay so many millions, I think $2 million or whatever, as one of these payments that you have to make different payments at different timelines. Same thing that happens with countries that get the Olympics. They've got to pay the Olympic organizing committee and all this kind of stuff like that. Well, Colombia never paid the bill. The sport ministry, the head of the Colombia has a minister of sports, and in this case, it was Astrid Rodriguez, who was, of course, is a Petro appointee. Petro also ran during his campaign on the platform of, hey, we're going to use sport to uplift the dignity of people and peace through sport, and that's part of his thing, like culture and sport and this kind of which you see a lot in. Well, it was, I'll just say this, it was something central to what he indicated his priorities would be. So here they have the Pan Am Games, which are a really big deal. Not only are they a lot of fun, they bring a lot of business in and things like that, show off the country, get worldwide exposure. They had already won the deal. They were going to be, I think, next year. But anyway, they didn't pay the bill. So they were supposed to send a couple $1 million to the organizing committee in December. They didn't do it. They negotiated to get kind of an extension or something like that. They still didn't send the money. And it's a matter, you just have to go in there and send the wire. And it's not like, and Colombia has the money. It's, it's a big government. It's 50 million people down here. But it looks like just incompetence or a lackadaisical attitude or hubris. We're the government. They're not going to tell us what to do. But they screwed around and lost the games. And so they tried to blame the organizing committee, but they just didn't make the payment. I mean, it's black and white. You've got the contract. All right, you now you're supposed to send the money. And so then Petro all of a sudden starts running around and scrambling. And he's like, oh, he starts bullying the committee on Twitter. And he's running around saying, and he tries to talk to the other countries that, the different competing countries in South America. And the committee took the games away from Colombia for not paying their bill, gave them to Paraguay. So now the games are going to be in Paraguay, which is a big win for Paraguay because it's one of these countries you never hear about. Way down there on the other side of Bolivia. And not a big population country, not a big tourism destination, but they got the games and they got them simply because Colombia did not pay their bill. They knew they had the bill to pay it, but the committee's like, hey, you got to pay this bill. And I don't know if the attitude was, hey, go away, kids, or we'll do what we want to do or whatever. But whatever happened, they didn't pay the bill. They simply did not send the money that they were supposed to send. They were in breach of contract. And then Petro, after the fact, tries to talk them back and try to kind of convince them or say, no, you've got to give them to us and blah, blah, blah. They didn't. He had kind of a temper tantrum and blamed everybody and blamed the diplomats in Chile or wherever for, like it's a plot against Colombia or something like that. They just didn't pay the bill. Okay. And take responsibility for that. There's too much improvisation going on. That's my editorial opinion, but it's another failure, and it's a failure for a lack of execution, a lack of competency in governance. It's one thing to be a politician. It's one thing to be a polemicist or a rabble rouser. It's another thing to govern and to administer. And I'm not taking sides. You can go and look up articles I wrote about why nobody likes Ivan Duque. Ivan Duque largely seen as failure. So I'm not. So the first thing that Petro supporters do is go, you're with the Uribe. Or they wouldn't think so. They probably thought I was some kind of commie because I would criticize them for the stuff that they screwed up. Okay, and that's kind of my job here. So anyway. Moving, trying to get away from politics. Some good news. JetSmart, the Chilean airline that is owned in part by Indigo Partners, which is a airline-focused, aviation-focused private equity firm in the United States. I think they're in Colorado. Also with investments from American Airlines. JetSmart already operates flights into and out of Colombia. It's international airline focused on South America. It's a low-cost carrier. But filling the hole that was left by when Avianca when they refused to capitalize Viva after purchasing them. And then Viva died on the vine, as they would say, or as I would say. Or JetSmart, when both of those, not JetSmart, but when Ultra Air, when those two low-cost carriers failed last year, then that created there were no real alternatives when it came to low-cost aviation networks. You have Wingo, and Wingo is owned by Copa. Copa seems to be taking a very conservative strategy with them in the sense of they do fly some routes, but they don't fly an extensive route network, and they don't seem to be in any kind of rapid growth mode. Well, anyway, JetSmart, aside from flying international routes into and out of Colombia, is now going to launch a domestic route network. So they've created a subsidiary, and they're going to be able to fly routes inside of Colombia. So Medellín, Bogotá, Cartagena. I think, let me see, they've got 5 or 6 different cities. We did an article, and those flights are going to start the second 2 weeks of March. So now there is an alternative to the legacy carriers, primarily LATAM and Avianca. And so it's going to be interesting to see how JetSmart does. As a traveler, as a journalist, I am neutral. As a traveler, we saw how the airfares skyrocketed. Once, Viva used to have what they called the Viva effect, and it was real because they kept the industry rates down. Avianca, for, a lot of different reasons, but one of them has to be the rate pressure, ended up in bankruptcy. So I don't know if Avianca's kind of getting their revenge, but basically the rates have been high since, if you have to travel here in Colombia, the rates have been very high since the demise of Viva. And you have a choice between LATAM and Avianca. And so as a passenger, it's exciting to see alternatives coming to the market with a well-funded competitor. Speaking of Avianca, Avianca they changed their unaccompanied minor policy. So most airlines will fly kids, and if there's no parent flying, I remember, for example, when I lived in Florida and my daughter was 8 or 9, and I would send her back and forth between Ohio and Florida, and she would fly by herself, and she loved it. She didn't care. She's very independent, so she thought it made her feel like a big girl. And but anyway, the airlines, if you're under a certain age, if you're a minor, if you're legally if you're not 18, but you're 16 or 17, the airlines are like, well, you ought to be able to navigate your way or how to get in and out of an airplane. But if you're younger, then you usually, the parents or whoever, the guardians have to pay more, but then the airline will give you extra attention, and they'll assign somebody from the airline to kind of travel with you and accompany you and take you from, whatever responsible adult's supposed to give you, so you're not some little kid lost alone in an airport. Avianca changed their policy now, and they will end unaccompanied minor service for children under 14. So if a kid is 14, 15, 16, 17, the kid can still fly alone. But under 14, Avianca's, they need a responsible adult. Another thing to keep in mind for travelers is that Colombia has very strict laws regarding minors flying. And you need to have, and this is interesting because you can be a kid from a different country and say you're flying with one parent. You can fly into or out of Colombia with just one parent, and you're not Colombian, the kid's not Colombian, it's no problem. But if it's a Colombian kid, the Colombian kid has to either fly with both parents, or the kid has to have, or the adult, or with the kid has to have notarized paperwork from the other parent explicitly giving permission to travel, or they won't let the person travel or come out of immigration. Um, it gets more complicated if the kid is like, say if you only have one parent, say there's a single father, or say the mother died or the mother disappeared or the father died or disappeared or whatever the case might be, then you've got to actually go and get, like court, you have to go and get the government to give you permission and saying this is the only parent and such and such. It really gets to be a complex situation. Minor travel with minors in Colombia. But anyway, Avianca just ended that service, so that's something that travelers should know about if they're traveling or if they're sending younger children, let's say, to a parent or to visit relatives in Colombia. Now, let's see, last month Piedad Cordoba died. So Piedad Cordoba was a senator in Colombia. Her brother is in a U.S. jail for basically for nexus with criminal elements. Piedad Cordoba was involved in the negotiations with the FARC. She got prosecuted during the was it the Santos administration or Uribe administration? I think it was the Santos administration. She was prosecuted by and it turned out she actually won, and the charges got thrown out. But they said that she was actually a FARC ally, and those charges she beat, and so that was not determined to be the case. She certainly was kind of a sympathizer or intermediary with them. That shadow still hung over her shoulder. On one hand, a lot of her supporters considered her a human rights fighter, certainly a kind of a left-wing person, but and you could say allied or sympathetic to, and that's a whole discussion that you could have, but as to how much or how close she was to some of these left-wing groups. A friend of Chavez and Venezuelan, some of the movement in Venezuela. So there are people, mostly kind of far left people, who saw her as a hero. Ingrid Betancourt, who's no right-wing person herself, is I would consider her kind of a left-wing person, actually accuses Piedad Cordova of prolonging her being held. Remember, she was held for years by FARC kidnappers. She was running for president and got she went to an area they told her not to go down there. They said it's insecure. She's like, I can go talk to the people. And so she went down there in southern Colombia, central southern Colombia. I forget exactly what department, and campaigning, and got captured and was held for years. Ended up having a baby with one of her captors. But anyway, Ingrid Betancourt actually accuses Piedad Cordova of working with the FARC to prolong her years of detention. So Piedad Cordova had a very mixed legacy, depending upon who you ask. Some people saw her as a saint, other people saw her as a villain, but she passed away last month, a big figure in Colombian politics of the last, I'd say, 3 decades. The economy slowing, 0.6% growth. So again, that's going to be additional pressure on Petro, who I believe was educated as an economist. But anyway, he of course has been hostile towards the petroleum and mining sectors during his administration. We're in the second year of his administration. Really, with petroleum, so that's put a brake on things. He's not allowing new permits. With mining, they've issued a decree where he can, his administration can unilaterally declare a mine as an environmental kind of reserve and just arbitrarily yank permits. Now, that will certainly be challenged in court. but it does create an additional amount of uncertainty. I know of cases of businesses who have quietly shelved their plans in Colombia when he got elected because not even in the mining sector, not in mining or petroleum, but large, I know of one very large European company that confidentially, well, their project was announced and they just quietly, they didn't want to come out and antagonize the president, but the factory didn't get built, and they said we're going to wait and see what happens. And so there's the natural business cycle of things, but certainly some portion of the brakes on the economy have to be due to a slowdown in new investment and uncertainty caused by this kind of improvisational spirit of the government. So let's see. Let's end on some good news. Collective Mining, small early stage mining company, the same team that largely the same team, the same leadership that developed and sold Continental Mining to Zijin. If you look at the problems that Zijin now has, it's once they took it over themselves. But actually, when it was sold, Continental was doing wonderfully. The team that that developed and sold that is now working on a project down in Caldas, Colombia, down in the Caldas department near the border with Antioquia, near a town called Supia. Collective Mining, they trade on Toronto TSX and also U.S. over-the-counter, and I think they're on Frankfurt Exchange as well. But they are finding some impressive results in their exploratory drilling and have added a second rig. A lot of people don't realize with the junior mining company or an explorer, so you have two phases with the mine. And you have the part where you're kind of figuring out where the gold is, or silver or copper or lithium or whatever the metal is, or the whatever you're mining. It could be coal. And so you've got the early stage mining, which is let's go see where it is. And then after that, the second stage or the later stage is when you actually build the mine. So you start extracting the mineral or whatever it is that you're mining, right? So a lot of times what happens is you'll have geologists and you have people and their whole career is in one stage or another. So they go and find the gold and then they take their rights that they have, the title, or in the Old West, we'd say the mining claim, and they've proven that they know what's in the ground, and then they go and they sell that to another company to actually come in with the heavy equipment, one of these big companies like Newmont or Zijing or somebody like that, to actually build the real mine with all the giant trucks and the big tunnels and all that kind of stuff like that. So this team actually knows how to do both. They know how to do the exploration, but then if you look at Continental, they've also demonstrated that they can build out a mine. They know how to actually build the infrastructure. So when they sold Continental, there was a functional modern mine there built up in Buritica, Antioquia. So they're at it again. They've added a second rig. Now people don't realize that what happens is, so you get these drill rigs and they come and they drill these core samples. They kind of, it's like when you do a biopsy on a person. They go way down into the earth and they pull out a core, and so you'll take like a tube of dirt and minerals or whatever that goes down, let's say 1,000 feet, okay, or 1,000 meters, 1 kilometer, and then you look at that and you measure it, you send it off to a lab and say, okay, how much gold's in here? All right, now then that's where you're figuring out where the gold is. To do that, they need to pay, I guess a big company might even own this stuff themselves, but you'll pay a drilling contractor, and they've got to take these big, huge machines up in the mountains somewhere. They're always out in the middle of nowhere. And you're paying them thousands of dollars a day. And a lot of these miners will go broke in the exploratory phase, just trying to figure out where the stuff is. And they might even think that they might even know that they've got a great mine, but they run out of money before they have enough proof to get to the next level. And so that's an interesting, that's kind of how that's why it's such a high risk industry, but especially at the early stage. But anyway, so I thought I'd end on some good news. I'm very bullish on what they're doing down there. And another thing that impresses me about this team and about this mine, the new mine, they call it Collective Mining, that's the company, is that they go in and their strategy, the first thing they do is they go in and they develop a relationship with the local people. So that's like the local mayor and the local people who live in the area. Even if there are artisanal miners or informal miners, they go in and they go, look, we're not here to threaten you or to displace you or anything like that. We want to work, um, in peace with you. And so they don't take a confrontational or hostile approach. They go in and take the time to develop relationships with the local community. I saw them do this up in Buritica. I've been up there myself. Um, and now that's deteriorated now so that Xi has it and all that's sadly really falling apart. And now they've got a hot mess up there. But down in Supia, this group with collective mining is doing the same thing again. They are they are building links with the local community, not just the politicians, but they're when they buy food from the local restaurants. When they need, I remember up in Buritica, they would when they needed uniforms, they didn't go get the uniforms from some company in across the ocean somewhere. They had local um, seamstresses build, sew the uniforms. They contracted with them directly and things like that. And so it's impressive and kind of exciting. I've been down to their mine, or not. It's not a mine. I shouldn't say that. I've been down to their site in Supia, near Supia Caldas, and it's impressive. It's exciting to see what they're doing. We just published an article because they found the results that they're getting from their core samples have justified them adding another rig to that. And so I am long on Continental. So until next time, leave me your comments. Tell me what you think about what I've said. If I am wrong, if I'm wrong about Petro, if I'm wrong about Fico, if I'm wrong about Quintero, or what I ought to be covering, let me know in the comments because I'm doing this for you, and I want to know what you think, and I want to know what I need to talk more about. Am I boring you? Am I going too long? So until next time, take care, be kind, and be safe. And thanks again for your attention.